Okay, welcome back. You will remember from the last video we were getting the engines out of the boat, and this was the last few frames in the last video, and we did get them out. So let's take a look. At this point we're loading everything up. Motors is up in the back of the truck. We got to take it to the house. Motor back to the shop, and we're going to start taking it apart, taking the parts that we're going to use off the old motor and put on the new crate engine that we have. The first thing that we're going to do that we show is we're taking the transmission loose. Now there's 6 bolts that hold the transmission, and a little secret, one is hidden behind the starter, and it took us a few minutes to figure that one out, but we figured it out. And we just got the engine on the lift here. Makes it a little easier to get to the bolts, but in a minute I let it down, and it kind of takes pressure on the back of the transmission, kind of helps us to work it off a little bit. But it's a pretty straightforward process. It's not that hard. You see I let it down a little quick there. We're going to be taking off the freshwater cooling system, and on each side there you can see there is a large hose clamp, and it goes around both the closed water system and the brackets that are mounted to the motor. So what you do is you release them off each end, and then it might be a little stuck. We take a little hammer and just tap them, and the system will come loose. I'm just using the hammer, tap it off, and then you can kind of see that it's going to come loose. Front of the engine, I follow the hoses that come from the water system, and since I've got it loose in the back, I'm going to loosen the hose clamps up front. It's going to pretty much drain the system out. But what you see me doing there is marking these hoses. This just makes it a lot easier when you're putting it back. You just kind of read. You'll see blue tape on different things. This is a good system for helping you to determine where things go. I mean, there's another engine in there, but it's just easier if you have it all marked. Makes it install much easier. Hoses in the front, and takes it quite a bit of work. These hoses have been on here a while, and you got to kind of work them off, and the antifreeze, which is in the closed water system, is going to come out. And I'll just go ahead and remove the cooler system here. I am continue on releasing the closed water system, which is hooked to a cooler here on this side, which is also hooked to the motor bracket. As you can see, we'll get it loose here and show you where I'm taking off the flywheel here in the back of the engine. These bolts have been on here a while, and I'm using the air impact. It helps it to release them, make them loose. And you see me here using my Sharpie to mark them. Everything I take off, I try to mark it, so it just makes it easier whenever we're putting it back on. And it's just showing you here there's 3 bolts holding this part of it on, and that's pretty straightforward. The flywheel marked, and again the marking just so you don't have to really study it when you figure out which side goes back. And there's things you can look at, like where the bolts were and that, but this makes it easier. I'm setting the engine down here just so I can use my tool to loosen the bolts without having to fight it quite as much. And here you see I'll use the air impact, and I'll pull up on it, and then I'll squeeze the handle, and it'll back the bolt out for me. Just easier than doing a lot of wrenching. Things you're going to see me do is when I take a bolt out, If it's holding something or a bracket or something that I can go to the crate engine, which is over there, that's the new crate engine, and I will go and see if I can put it right into the hole that it belongs. It just makes it a lot easier for knowing where things go. I do it the easy way. Artie Ray is just getting back. He went and picked up an engine stand from his shop, and we're just going to use it to switch parts over. Makes it a little easier. Around to the front of the engine, and he's going to pull off the harmonic balancer using a harmonic balancer removing tool. You can get these for a few dollars at any auto parts store. You can rent them, and we just use the air impact. It just makes it a lot easier, than wrenching it. And you just go real slow, and you're going to see here as it'll come loose. And it's a pretty simple operation. What we're going to do is take the timing chain cover off and use a little pry bar here to start loosening it up a little bit. And then I think we get a 5-in-1 tool to kind of work down in there, and it's just going to be tight because it's been on there for years, and the gaskets are stuck pretty well, which they done their job. But you just want to take your time and don't bend your cover. That way you can reuse it. And we just break the seal all the way around. You can see it starting to come loose now here, and we'll continue to work on it down to the bottom. And it'll pop off eventually. It just takes a little bit of time. Just remember, never force anything. Make sure you have all your bolts out, and then it's going to come out. This is the intake manifold, and there's 12 total bolts holding that in. And you can see I'm just pointing them out where they are. You take them out and then do a little bit of prying, and that'll usually come loose pretty easily.
Yeah, this one didn't look near as bad. Don't look terrible.
Compared to the other one. Not chocolate.
It's like it's never been changed.
We drained the oil out, and you can tell it hadn't been changed in a good while. So we just drained the oil out.
You hear that?
What did he say?
They boat is no accident. Never swing a person near a boat dock.
Okay, what you see me releasing here is the oil filter mount, and in marine engines they run this device that has the lines you'll see down to where the oil filter would normally mount, and it moves the oil filter up to the top of the engine, them hoses, and you'll see that a little later on, but it's 2 Allen wrenches inside, and that's what will release that.
Yeah, when you say something right there, they say, Mike, who?
Okay, you'll see that I continue to back out the 2 Allen bolts. I'll get them out, and already I'll tap it with the hammer a little bit, and it'll come loose. And you notice the hoses where it goes up to the other end, that's where the oil filter would set up on top. Artie's holding it. We start to take the oil pan loose. Now Artie is releasing the larger Allen bolts. That there's 4 of them on each 4 corners of the oil pan. Now you'll see him backing them out here, and then I'll take over and I'll get a little smaller Allen wrench, and then I think there's about 6 or 8 smaller ones on down through the middle, and you'll back those out, and then the oil pan will come loose. It's not really a hard task. Here we start releasing and removing the bolts for the oil deflection pan. I think it's a 9/16, and you just back out the bolts, and then the pan will lift up off of there. Alright, we have removed all the bolts for the oil pan deflection, and here is the oil pump. Artie just pulls it out, as I had already removed the bolts for that, and we're going to turn it over just to make it a little easier to start getting to a few more things. Okay, now this is the new engine. I've moved it over, got it off of the crate, and we jacked it up, and we're just now putting it on the stand. And we're going to just reverse the process. We're going to turn the motor back over, and the oil deflection pan and those items that we took off, we're going to just reverse the process and start putting them back on. Artie is taking off the bolts on the bottom side of the piston rod caps, and this is so we can put the oil deflection pan back on. Now, just to be killing some time while he was doing that, I am putting on the motor mount. We just wanted to put as many things on as we could just to make the process easier in the boat. I am putting on the oil deflection pan bolts, and all I'm really going to do here is snug them down so that we can come back with the torque wrench, as you'll see in a minute, and we'll properly torque them. So just kind of snug them down here, just to be able to get the oil deflection pan on, and then come back and torque everything. Okay, we get the torque wrench out and go ahead and get it set. And because of the torque on this, I start out, I think it was like 30 and then ended up being 70. So I start out a little bit and just go through, tighten them, and then come back and readjust it and then tighten the rest. Now I am bringing the oil deflection pan back, and I put it back on there, and the bolts that stick up, it's pretty easy just to line it up, and I'll take the nuts and put them back on there, and then we set the oil pump in place. There's 2 bolts there that go in that hold it down, and then we'll tighten them up. Here I'm doing just a little bit of cleaning, wiping off some oil, and then doing my final torquing. Okay, I've put the oil pan back on, and I'm going to take it off in a minute. What I'm doing is pushing it. When I put it on and push it down, it's pushing down the oil pump, and you're going to see that here in just a second. See how the oil pump is setting at an angle? And by putting your oil pan on, it pushes it, and then I'll move it down another 1/4 of an inch. And what that'll do is it'll get it about a 1/2 inch up off the bottom of the pan if you include the 1/4 of an inch as well as the gasket material. Now, of course, I'm taking, whenever we're going to put something back on, this liquid gasket sealer, we'll go and put it on, and it'll kind of help hold things in place. And it's real good material. It also helps to, seal any areas that might be missing, what have you. And we go ahead and put this on everything where we have a gasket, and it really makes life a lot easier. Okay, now we are starting to put the bolts back into the oil pan, and we've put the gasket on it. This shows you the 4 different bolts from the smaller ones that I was telling you about from earlier. And it's kind of a tedious process, but you got to go through here and just tighten them down. And I like to always start from the center as far as tightening and work out. Now I'll put them, as you can see here, I put the center ones in first, and then as you're tightening, you work from the center out. Okay, this is the oil filter adapter, and it's only got 2 Allen bolts that go through there. Just tighten them up. Now it's time to put on the timing chain cover, and of course it just has a gasket, and it's got several screws that go in and hold the plate on. Now there was a minor mistake made here, and I wonder if anybody can see it. If you do, list it down in the comments, and I will let you know, whoever sees it, if you see it first. Pretty minor, but just took about 10 minutes to fix it. But let's just see if you can figure that out. But again, putting the timing chain covers on is pretty easy. Just tighten the bolts up.
Where'd that big one go? Over there.
Okay, it's time to put the harmonic balancer back on, and all we do is take the bolt and the washer that holds it on, and we just slightly tap it on, and then use the bolt and the air impact to start tightening it down, and that will just pull it right on into place. Okay, next is the pulley, and it's pretty simple, probably one of the most simple things on the switch out, and it's nice to be getting to this point. And it basically has 3 bolts. Show you a little close up here, and you just kind of line them up and get them started. 4 bolts maybe, and then tighten them up with their impact, and that's probably one of the easiest things about the entire job. Okay, this is the bolt washer that we used from earlier to put on the harmonic balancer. Now that we have the pulley on, and we'll use an air impact tool and just tighten it up. Okay, we're getting ready to put on the water pump, and I'm using, of course, that high-tech gasket sealer. I painted it on and put my gaskets on, and the water pump goes on pretty easy. It's 4 bolts that hold it on. There are 2 bolts on each side, and you just kind of hold it up there, and you kind of got to look over and line them up. Usually when you get one side started, you can go on to the other side. You don't have to put the bolts all the way in, and just get one side started. Probably the hardest thing here is that when you're putting the bolts in, try not to move the gasket. You know, make sure the gasket stays in place, because water does flow through here. And then we'll just take a air impact wrench and we'll snug it down pretty good. And it's a pretty easy operation.
Full bore.
Okay, the next operation we got going here is the intake manifold in around 86 changed, and Chevrolet changed the angle that these 4 bolts that are in the center of the intake go in. So you are able to use the older intake, and all you do is, you see I'm taking this cutoff wheel and I'm cutting slots out of where the bolts go. And all that does is it allows the bolts to stand up straight, and it's not hard to do, and they'll go in the same holes and they'll tighten down, and you'll see in a little bit. Okay, our next operation here is we got the high tack out, and we want to take our time here putting on this high tack and getting ready to put on our gaskets. Now this is not something, and I'm going to speed it up whenever in the video just because it's pretty much the same thing, but I want you to understand that this is important, that you take your time, be sure that your gaskets are in the right place. And the reason is pretty multifold. Is, you know, in this area you have water coming through, you have oil being pumped up and moving through here. So of your places that you have to have a seal, you need to be sure you take your time and do this entire area. So here you see me just going around every place that these gaskets are going to set, and I'm just trying to take my time and be extra sure that we don't have any leaks in here. Leaks in this area on the engine could be catastrophic, so take your time, use your high tack, go ahead and go in every area, especially around all the openings that you see here, and just do a real good job. Make sure you cover every area here. Alright, you see here that we put the gasket on, just making sure that it's settled in very well. And then we have some tube of Permatext gasket sealant, and we're going to put it on the end. Just showing you a picture here. We're going to put it on the end where these particular gaskets don't go. And notice how I lift up here on the end, and I take some of that sealant and get up under it, and then I put a dab right on the corner. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to slightly lift it, put some under it, and then a dab on top of it. Alright, this is real important, and we're going to do both ends. We're going to follow that line all the way down, and this is a little better shot. And we're going to lift it up, put a little bit under it, and a dab on top of it. Lift it up, right on the corner there's little tabs, and put some under it, push the gasket back down, and then put a little dab on top of it. Alright, important procedure. Okay, the next operation we got going here is prepping the intake, and we've got the high tack here again, and we're going on the intake side this time, and it's going to meet up with the blue gasket there that you can see on the block. And just as we talked about earlier, you want to take your time, you want to be sure that you cover every surface, and it just helps to be sure that this seals with a gasket. The gasket's primary job is to seal it, and this is a secondary type sealant as well, you know, in some cases to help hold. So just take your time here, like we talked about earlier, and the video is going to speed up. And of course, you can tell I was taking my time, but take your time, make sure you cover every opening, around every possible opening, and then we're going to show you setting it down. Alright, now it's time to put the intake on. And you can see I got it, it's kind of heavy, but what I'll do is look down in between the holes and make sure that they line up in the hole where the bolts go. On each one of those lift points are 2 bolts, and we kind of like to start those first. And once we get them started, then we'll be able to go around and snug the ones up and start from the center and work out. Now all I'm doing is these are the ones where I actually cut the intake. They're the center ones, and I'm just snugging them down, starting in the center and work outward. Okay, so there's 4 here in the center. Now the next thing I'm going to do is move to the outside. Alright, that's the next one over. And at this point all I'm doing is snugging them down. I'm just kind of pressing it out as I go. So I've now worked all the way out to that outside bolt. I'll go back to the one closest towards the center. This is on one of those lift points, and I'll just snug it down, and then I'll jump over and do the same thing on the end one. So again, you're going to start at the center and work outward. So remember, I did the ones on the center on this side, so now I jumped over to the next one and just snugging it down. And I'll do the same thing, go to the outside one there, and then I'll come back to the closest one on the inside here. But just remember, center out. Okay, I've got the torque wrench out now, and I'll do just like I did a while ago whenever I was snugging them down, and I'll start at the center and start working out. Now whenever, like I said, on my torque, when I use my torque wrench, if it's, let's just say, 70 pounds of foot pressure, I'll start at 30 or 40 and start slowly working up. But again, start it there in the center and start working out. This next one over. It's a pretty basic operation. I've said it 20 times, I'll say it one more time, but probably the most important thing is start on your center and work toward the ends, work outward. If you do that, you're not going to have any problem. Okay, we took a little break, and while I was gone there, we put the carburetor on. It had 4 studs sticking up. We just slide it over the top, tighten the nuts up. We put on the gooseneck. We've already slipped in the distributor, which I'm going to do a video strictly on that. And we've also put on the brackets for the closed water system and slipped it on. You'll remember when we took it off, those brackets, when you set it on top, you put the clamps over on the ends, and that's what holds that down. Okay, now we're moving on to putting on the flywheel assembly, and this is the flywheel we've slipped up. Shows you the 5 bolts. All you do is, if you'll remember, I wrote which side the flywheel goes, just to be sure, just to make it easy. And I slipped them on with that side facing outward. And those 5 bolts, I'm just taking the air wrench and I'm going to tighten them down, and it's really pretty easy to do, straightforward, and I'll just tighten them up. Alright, the next part is the coupling assembly here that's going to mount onto the back side of the flywheel, and it only has 3 bolts to mount it up. And I was looking here, making sure, doing my reading, making sure everything is on the up and up, and as to which bolt went where, but it has a little tab that kind of shows you, so that's pretty easy. Just take your time, get them in there, start them, and then get your wrench and snug these up real pretty tight. I mean, also never want to break a bolt But certain things like this, there's a lot of movement in it. You want to snug these up just really as tight as you think you can get it without doing any damage. Okay, now we are moving on to installing the transmission. This is probably one of the more challenging parts of this engine swap out, and basically because of the weight. Now you notice we've let the motor all the way down and we're sliding the transmission up. There's 6 bolts that hold the transmission in place, but you got to get it up close enough so that you can start those bolts. And we've done that here. We held it up, already gave me the bolts, and I was able to get them started. Once you get the ones at the top started, you can work down toward the bottom as you see what we're doing here. And it's just really going to take some lifting and some wiggling to get those splines to go up together, but then it's just a matter of lining up your bolts to go into the backside of the engine. Man, was I happy to get this point right here. This engine's put together up in the back of the truck and getting ready to transport it to Tampa. And the next video y'all going to see is this one right here, this engine going back in the boat. I know it was a long video, but I wanted to show it all. So stay tuned and see you soon.